Shabbat Shalom, everyone. I'm Abigail, and welcome to this week's special Zion Tabernacle of Greater Austin, Texas Shabbat meeting. To begin, our brother Richard is going to say a prayer over the meeting.
Holy Father, we thank you for hearing us in Yeshua's glorious name. We thank you for this new year. We have been blessed already. You are good, always good to us. Father, we always want to hear your voice and obey your word, your Torah. And you said you'd be faithful to reach those who you want on the earth. And we're looking to get a hold of your people, the ones that you call the remnant, and those that would be joined to us. So, Father, just help this meeting to go smoothly and for us to have the word of the hour in this season. In Yeshua's name, I thank you.
And now for a special coronavirus presentation with Eliyahu ben David.
Hello, friends. It's great to have you with us this evening, and a special welcome to our many new friends who are with us on our video stream tonight. It's great to get to greet you here near the beginning of this new Hebrew year. And what an eventful year it already is. It seems that we're beginning this year in the midst of a bioweapon attack. And that's what we want to talk about, because that's what's on everybody's mind right now. And there has been a lot of questions, a lot of confusion by people all over the world about this. As you know, we've already put out some videos regarding the virus. And we started out with videos that were about our immediate response to the virus and things we could do about it, because that's what you needed to know first. That's what we needed to focus on first, is our response to it. We've done that now, and we want to move on to actually talk about what the virus is really all about. And as you can see, my theme is the Weaponized CCP Virus promotes UN Agenda 2030. Now, that may not sound like a biblical theme, but actually, if you have followed my messages over a period of years, you will know that this actually is a biblical theme that relates to Bible prophecy. And that's the reason we're going into these details. Now, I want to have full disclosure with everyone that's listening, particularly any new listeners we may have. And in tonight's presentation, I'm going to deal with quite a few things that are about geopolitics and various politicians in the world. And this is not to promote any politician or political system, because the truth is, I'm not even a voter. So I couldn't be and wouldn't be trying to influence other people to vote for a certain candidate. What I'm trying to do here is simply relay the facts unmitigated by propaganda as they actually appear, as they actually are, with all of that out of the picture. And the reason is because you have to know what is really happening in the world to understand world events as they're foretold in the Bible. And since I am a Bible teacher and author and history researcher, that's the direction that I'm coming from with all of this. Well, let's dig in. The first thing I wanted to address is how some people might view this presentation. There are some folks that would look at the name of this presentation and think, well, this is racist. You could hear some people say that. Now, I don't see any reason from my title to think that it's racist, but this is the sort of thing you get today. Some people might think that because we sometimes use the term Wuhan coronavirus, and since it's a place, then some people consider it racist, even though in the past we've had the Spanish flu, we've had the German flu, we've had flus named after a whole bunch of different places, but somehow now all of a sudden to use the name of a place is racist. This virus is called by other names as well. The novel coronavirus, COVID-19, and a lot of people are starting to use this term, the CCP coronavirus, and variants of that, and that's the term that I'm choosing to use this evening, principally. And where this gets its name is CCP stands for the Communist Party of China. And the Communist Party in China is the ruling regime in China. And by saying CCP, what we're doing is we're focusing on a governmental system. That's what we're really talking about, rather than a race of people. And really, the more you know about the CCP, the more you'll know the people who suffer most from the CCP are the Chinese people. And that's a fact. So it's really not racist to call it the CCP virus. So what about being unreasonable or cruel? You know, things that people don't understand many times, they think of as unreasonable. And I think as I explain this to you, you're going to see that to suspect the CCP of actually weaponizing this virus and putting it into use is not a conspiracy theory at all. It's very much in keeping with their goals and intentions. And I'm going to share that with you. And this is because the CCP military, which is just a subset of the CCP, has adopted a mode of warfare which has been articulated by its military officers, has been documented by their military officers as having absolutely no ethical limits. Now, let me explain that the CCP in the 20th century provably murdered somewhere between 1 million and 8 million of their own people in order to promote the goals of the CCP. And this is the same group today. This is the same government today that we're dealing with regarding the weaponization of the CCP virus. It's no different than they've been in the past. And this is how they view warfare. Absolutely everything is on the table. So when we talk about this, you know, like you and I, we would be shocked to think that a government might, say, infect their own people with a virus because they have a larger military purpose of infecting the rest of the world. And you might think, well, that has to be a conspiracy theory because nobody would ever do that. Well, the same people that might think that would think, well, no government would actually murder 8 million of their own people. these people did. They did that. When you're dealing with people like this, you're dealing with people that will do anything in order to promote their own purposes. So, while all of this is shocking, there's documented history about this, and personally, I've been warning about the dangers of the CCP since the around 2006, 2007 forward. So this was on my radar for quite a long time. And I talked about this in my radio programs on the road to Zion. What you see here is the fact that back in 2007, we had a program on unrestricted warfare. We even had a copy of this book, which you still can download from our website. And this book, called Unrestricted Warfare, was written by two senior colonels of the Chinese military. And it lays out their strategy for conducting warfare. And it's really quite, spine-tingling. They call it unrestricted warfare. The book sets out a strategy of warfare by which China and other technologically weaker countries may war against and overcome a technically superior force, namely the USA. And what this kind of war is about is to avoid overt live fire kind of situations. In other words, it doesn't look like a war because nobody's shooting each other. Instead, what it is what's called asymmetrical warfare. And it's pitting not just armies, but really entire civilizations against one another using absolutely everything. All kinds of various political influence, media influence, terrorists, economic influence, and many other things, actually absolutely anything to win the battle. And the stated purpose of the CCP is to rule the world. That's what this is all about for them. And when we look at this, what we see is that this unrestricted warfare actually kind of goes together a lot with what the scriptures tell us would happen in the last days. And it therefore fulfills Bible prophecy. So back when I was sharing this, back in 2007 and onward, it was to let people know that the CCP was going to be playing a much greater role in the last days. Here we have a list of some of the various ways in which unrestricted warfare is waged. And as you can see, it does include military, but also other things. And it is called anything warfare, no rules. And of course, the biggest thing about this kind of warfare is you deny everything. The whole purpose is to wage the war without anybody identifying that you're actually waging a war. So it involves lying, deception, and denial. That's why you'll never find any documentation where the people who are perpetrating the war are going to tell you they're doing it. You have to understand what's going on from the effects of the war. But the fact that they told us that they're using this strategy means when you see these methods working, even though they deny them, it's still what they're doing. Now, here's some things that they've been doing recently that kind of shows you their mental attitude and how they think about using everything in order to get what they want. One strategy that they're using is weaponizing its supply monopoly. You see, over the past few decades, what China has been doing is deliberately developing monopolies over certain products and over certain resources so that they can control them and use them as a weapon to coerce and control the rest of the world. And what has come out recently because of the virus is that the U.S. imports almost all of its medical equipment and supplies and even drugs from China. How stupid is that? But that's what we've been doing. And this is not only true in the medical field, it's true in many other fields as well, putting us basically in the position of being dependent on China and having to comply with them in order to get these things we need. Recently, this has been in the news, and for instance, there's this article about the Black Swan supply chain. U.S. dependence on China for pharma, medical supplies may lead to severe interruptions. Suppose China wanted to push up the death count in America. Simply interrupt the supply of medical supplies, and that happens. But it's not their fault because there's this big problem of shipping and everything right now, so you can't really pin anything on them. All we know is that we haven't had respirators, we haven't had other medical supplies that are needed during the virus. As a matter of fact, China threatened to withhold all medical let me say that again, all medical exports, saying the United States will fall into the hell of a coronavirus epidemic. And they made this threat in order to make America stop talking about their responsibility, that is, the CCP's responsibility for creating the virus and allowing it to get out in the first place. This is the sort of thing they do. And there's a lot more I could point to, but here's one I think we're all familiar with. They threatened to withhold, yes, toilet paper. Perhaps you've been affected by this. Saying, we will not allow our toilet paper to grace the American population while they blame us for this pandemic. So if you see the press being overly kind to China, this could be part of the reason. Sadly, even the U.S. military is dependent on the CCP. Now, what kind of deal is this when the military of a country is dependent on their enemy? Can I buy some bullets for you so I can shoot you? Here's how. China has a near monopoly on what's called rare earths. These are very rare minerals that are used in high-tech devices, which are absolutely necessary to a modern military. And in our military, we need these rare earths in order to produce this high-tech stuff. So, you know, you might think, like if you're an American, you might think, well, our country's really strong. We have all of these satellites. We have all of this military hardware. Well, what if we can't get the rare earth minerals we need to make those things work? Then where are we at? So, recently, we have this article from Reuters. U.S. military comes to grips with over-reliance on Chinese imports. Do you know why they came to grips with that? Finally, a certain president of the United States came along and told them they needed to deal with the problem. That's why it happened. And much of the technology used by the military depends, as I've said, on these rare earth minerals and other things that come from China and technology that comes from China. And this has been a major problem for us in America. Also, here's something else. China is seeking to dominate large areas of high-tech communications, software, and other sorts of things. And they use this for surveillance. And what you have to understand is that in China, the CCP runs everything. There are no private businesses in China. They're all an arm of the government, every single one of them. The CCP is over everything. And they build surveillance and spy capabilities into their software, into their hardware, wherever they can get it out. And then, of course, they subsidize it and sell it at the cheapest possible price so that people all over the world will buy it and use it, and then they can spy on all those people and get vital information, in some cases like their personal information, where then they can steal money out of their bank account or compromise them in other ways, and other kinds of information that are strategic, sometimes business information or military information. Well, the military recently grappled with the problem with this software called TikTok, which is a social media platform. And the soldiers are using it to communicate with one another and to communicate at home. How great would that be for a foreign government to have this kind of information? You know, if a soldier just says, not just one soldier, let's say 1,000 soldiers, all get on TikTok and they talk to their friends, their loved ones, and say, well, I'm being called up to go to such and such a place, then what? You know, in World War II, there was this saying, loose lips sink ships. How could the military even let this happen? And then we have the problem of hacking, CCP cyber hacking. And you would think there was enough trouble for people right now dealing with the virus, right? But no, this is a perfect time for their hackers to massively hack computers around the world because people are distracted by dealing with the virus problem. Here's an article about it. Chinese hackers weaponize coronavirus data for new cyber attack. And it explains all about these massive cyber attacks that are happening. Here's another article. Coronavirus triggers worldwide cyber attacks. I know of what I speak. This is a record from our server. We became aware of these coronavirus cyber attacks on March 19th, and we recorded the record. On that day, our server logged over 110 million cyber attacks in one day on our server. We're not talking about a bank. We're not talking about some high-level target, like a military target or something. Our server, over 110 million attacks in one day, all trying to break into our system, trying to break down our system, trying to steal any possible data they can get. Multiply that by how many other computers? Who knows? And it gives you an idea of the scope of this. Just when you look at the numbers, you know this isn't individuals. You can't get some high school kid sitting down at his computer in his room doing 110 million cyber attacks on our server. That's obviously a big player, a state player doing that. By the way, so far as we know, they didn't get in. So when we look at all of this, and this is all part and much more of unrestricted warfare that they have been waging for years. And this has been going on and going on. How did America's politicians and leaders ever allow us to get into such a toxic relationship with CCP-ruled China? Why wasn't something done about this a long time ago? For decades, the elected U.S. officials and lawmakers have known the true nature of the CCP. They have investigated the CCP. They know that the CCP controls absolutely everything in China and that there is no private industry in China. They know that the CCP has a plan for world domination at the expense of the United States. They even know the CCP, among other things, has bioweapon capability. So why haven't they done something to shut down those channels into our country in all of that time? Now, let me prove my point. What you're seeing here is a congressional report. And this is from 1999. So over 20 years ago. They've had this information all this time. And this report details the activities of the CCP. And ostensibly the reason for the report is so that something would be done about it. But officers of the government who have the responsibility to protect the government have not been able to do that against the CCP because they've been continually blocked by politicians and big business. This documentation is available from the Government Publishing Office, and this is where I got it. And what you see here is part of the table of contents. The part that details some of the capabilities of the CCP. And in this list, I found it interesting that the first thing in the list is biological warfare. Here's a quote from the document. Quote, the 863 program, this is a CCP program that they instituted in the 80s, includes a recently unveiled plan for gene research that could have biological warfare applications. There is evidence that gene manipulation was used in order to create this weaponized CCP virus. Here's what it says right on the cover of the report. The CCP's main aim for the civilian economy is to support the building of modern military weapons and to support the aims of the PLA, that is the military, the Chinese military. The entire apparatus is military. And that's in the report from 20 years ago. In the report, they state, after their total investigation of this, that the CCP is the one bureaucracy ruling over everything. They have total control. And they are the source of all military goals and operations. So you see, you have the same people that are controlling their government and the civil aspect of their government, and foreign policy, commerce, all of it, using all of it for military purposes to bring about their goals. And for them, everything is military. So their entire society has been molded as a weapon against the West. In 1986, month number 3, the Communist Party of China officially declared asymmetrical hybrid warfare, really another term for unconditional warfare, against the U.S. and its Western allies in its nation-state program, 863. So realize this is not just a fanatical dream of a few of the officials of the CCP. This is an official program that they've been working all of this time. It goes on to say, this strategy commits all of China with its strict communist military rule to engage in any and all methods to become on par with, surpass, and dominate the West at any and all cost. Again, this is a government document that's saying this. So, realizing these objectives, realizing these methods of using everything as a weapon, we come to this same problem again. Rather than stopping this CCP threat, the government, the politicians, continued to perpetuate the CCP propaganda and kept opening up the doors here in America to the CCP. They own a lot of key things in the United States at this point. Summing up here, it says, over the past 30 years, the U.S. government and private sector have advanced a policy of full cooperation, including substantial financial and technological investment in China, fostering the belief that the CCP were moving towards a more democratic free market society, while the CCP used lies, misdirection, and deception. Just consider what's going on here. For all of this time, the politicians in the Congress had commissioned a study on this, had the full facts, understood the real goals of the CCP and how they were implementing them. and yet presented to the American people the idea that if we open ourselves up to China, then they'll become nice to us and play nice with America. That's what happened here in America. And this strategy is rooted in unrestricted warfare, that is, war without rules. Some of you might remember the Bill Clinton Asiagate scandal. At that time, there were actually Chinese operatives that came in and gave money to the Clintons and to the Democratic National Committee in order to turn the presidential election of 1996 toward the Clintons. Why would the Chinese want to give money to the Clintons and the Democrats so that they would win the election? Well, interestingly, they did take the money. Washington Post of 1998 says this: evidence gathered in federal surveillance intercepts has indicated that the Chinese government planned to increase China's influence in the U.S. political process in 1996. And eventually the Clintons and the DNC were forced to return $2.8 million they had received from the Chinese. This is what we know about, right? But this certainly helps to explain why the politicians have continued this policy with China, even though it's obviously harmful to the country. We have a record of what happened. Interestingly, this particular report is from 2012. Now, long time ago. And at that time, more than 2.7 million jobs from every state were lost to China. And as for the politicians, big business, they did everything they could to keep promoting this gravy train because the elite were getting rich off of cheap labor in China, leaving America, leaving American workers, denying them their jobs, giving those jobs to people in China that would work for peanuts, and then selling that same stuff back to their fired workers in America. Great deal for the elite, not so great for the average American. They're still doing this. You ever go to Walmart? Can you find anything in Walmart that's not made in China? So here's what happened. In effect, the American worker and consumer has financed the rise of CCP influence around the globe. All this money that the American worker has sent to China, thanks to our politicians and the elite, out of that, much of it has been used by China to influence not only America. Look at the big red glob in America of money coming back to get what China wants from America, but the whole rest of the globe. And China has been coming up and up and up at the expense of America. They would have you believe that's all just some kind of accident that happened. There's just, chance that happened. Even though they knew all along that it would happen. The truth is, the globalists have been partnering with useful idiot politicians and the CCP to systematically destroy the American power bloc. That's what they've been doing. And their wrecking ball has been the transfer of wealth from the American middle class to China. You know, the American middle class has shrunk dramatically in the last 30 years or so. And this is the reason that happened. And the globalists, they're just a bunch of good buddies. You know, they might be Democrats, they might be Republicans, but neither of those titles matter. They're globalists, and that's what matters. And they've been destroying America. They want a one-world government. That's what they're going for. But they know that only constitutional America, now by that I mean America as originally envisioned in the Constitution of the United States, only an America like that has the influence around the world to block their planned one-world government. That America was founded on a belief in God, a belief not in human rights, in God-given rights, that the government has no right to interfere with. That's the law of constitutional America. And that stands in stark contrast with a world government that essentially is tyrannical, where you are told what you must believe, you are told what you must do, and you are forced to do it or bear the consequences. Human rights are no rights at all if they can be given and taken by a government body. That's why the constitutional USA and her partners around the world have been systematically undermined from within for years. Yes, there is a battle going on, and it goes right down the middle of America and other countries around the world. It's no more one nation under God. It is a divided country. And civil war is already with us. It's been with us for a long time. The bad guys have been winning for a long time. This was the plot with China. This unlocks this. Simply using China to suck the wealth from the middle class in America, who basically are the people who have the traditional values, who treasure the Constitution, who treasure the Scriptures. These are the people that this particular plot was designed to ruin, to steal their power, to overturn the country, to bring in global government. That's why this has been happening all these decades. And the thing is, for a long time it was all going perfectly. By the time we got to the Obama administration, what were we hearing? Oh, those jobs are never going to come back. The world has changed now. We have to accept our new place in the world. You have to accept that you're going to be poor and not have anything. They thought they pretty much had won. So they were so confident, in fact, that in September of 2015, they sponsored a meeting at the United Nations where what is called a universal agenda for humanity was launched, called the 2030 Agenda. Do you remember that? Do you remember the Pope visiting America? Very big deal. He went to the UN and spoke at the UN, endorsing the 2030 Agenda. All the nations of the UN, which are essentially all the nations of the world, signed on to the plan, ratifying the 2030 Agenda, ratifying, in effect, a global government over the world. Before it happened that year, I explained that it was going to happen and the significance of it in this seminar called Beasts of Daniel Surfacing. It was a free seminar that we offered at that time. And many people watched it at that time. You can still watch it free at our website. So, you know, when you explain things like this to people, they think, oh, the UN is nothing. That's what they think. The UN is just an organization that tries to help people everywhere. That's what they want you to think. The truth is about the UN, this is what history will show you, that the planning of the UN can be traced back to a secret steering committee of a group who are known to be globalists. That is the Council on Foreign Relations, sometimes just called the CFR. And the fact is, the UN was created as an instrument that could be used to establish a global world government under the control of these globalists, this cabal of globalist elite. That's how it all started. And they have a number of different organizations, which by now you've probably heard of many of them. The United Nations is the most public thing. The Council of Foreign Relations is over it all. The Trilateral Commission you've probably heard of. Royal Institute of International Affairs. These are all kind of like think tanks and work groups of the elite. The Club of Rome and the Bilderberg Group, where all of the elite get together every year in this big secret meeting. It's the globalists. It's the globalists that invented the UN, not for all of the very helpful kind of purposes that we think of, but to enforce global government on the world. In 2030, we became aware of the goals of the 2030 Agenda, sometimes called the Sustainable Development Goals. Do you remember when you never heard of anything called sustainable development? And now, when you're reading the news, when you're watching the news, whatever, you keep hearing about sustainable development. Where do you think that came from? That's all a globalist thing. And it's really a pretext on which to take over the world. These goals that are laid out here, you can read all of this on the UN website. These goals actually take over control of every aspect of the earth and the people on it. That's what they do. You read through it, that's what you've got. Is a global government over every aspect of the earth and the people on it. That's it. Here's what they say. Now, this is quoting them from their website. The Sustainable Development Goals, also known as the Global Goals, were adopted by all United Nations member states in 2015 as a universal call to action. Goes on and talks about it, and finally it says, everyone is needed to reach these ambitious targets. All of society is necessary to achieve the SDGs in every context. Let's suppose I don't want to do it. Let's suppose you don't want to do it. You know, these goals basically require every human being to live in a big city. I don't want to live in a big city. What's going to happen? Just one little example. This represents massive control over mankind. The 2030 Agenda. You might want to read it. Here's a DVD set that we put out containing those messages from 2015, where we were warning people about this, and more importantly, where it sets out important information from the book of Daniel describing all of this that is happening right now and was happening then, and the rise of this global government. It was a historic thing, you know, when all of the nations of the world signed on to this. This was huge. And all of this is explained in detail in this DVD set. And as I mentioned, this can be seen free at Zion.net. And if you watched it in 2015, maybe you should come back and watch it again in view of the things that have happened since then. Because in only 5 years, the world has changed dramatically. And so many of the goals of Agenda 2030 have moved forward in a really an amazing way. Well, with the globalists making their big play, it was pretty much inevitable that there would be some people who would see how sinister that is and would push back against it. And really, it left a very sour taste in the mouth of a lot of people. That's what happened. So we could expect that there would be pushback, and that pushback came quickly. It came the next year, in 2016. What you're seeing here is another message that I put out back then. It was in July of 2016. So at that time, Donald Trump was not yet president. Everybody was saying that he didn't have a chance to become president. But I believed he would become president. And I wrote about it because he represented that pushback. Will nationalism trump globalism? Was the question. And it turned out he did become the leader of the pushback against the globalist plot to destroy America. And really his rise, Brexit, this whole field of what was going on at that time, this pushback movement against the globalism, signaled a war between nationalists and globalists. Now, realize this. The globalists had been making war on the nationalists for years. For years. But no effective resistance had ever been mounted. There were only like voices crying in the wilderness about it. Nobody was really stopping it. But now that the nations of the world had embraced this concept of a global government, I think that really shook a lot of people up. And so this pushback gained momentum. And Donald Trump apparently sensed that momentum and rose up as the anti-globalist. It's interesting back then that the newspapers, TV news, on the internet, they talked a lot about this war between the nationalists and the globalists. They don't talk about that anymore. They haven't talked about it again for a while. They have tried to submerge that whole view of the issue with a lot of other things, various slurs against those who are contrary to the globalist idea, kind of misdirecting the public conception of what's going on. But you know, at that particular point, it was very clear, if you were really watching the news, it was all about this globalist versus nationalist issue. I thought this was an interesting article from 2017. Top CFR globalist warns UN will get hammered by Trump. Now they were worried because now they had a credible threat to their plan. And they sensed that Trump was going to go right for the jugular. And you know what? He did. Here's an article, Trump blocks UN. This was just one thing. He did a lot more in the UN. And here he is at a United Nations Security Council briefing. He knew what they were doing. But while Trump was doing that, and I'm not going to repeat all that stuff you already know that you lived through, while Trump was blocking the UN, what was China doing in the UN? You know, a lot of us in America don't know that. We don't know what China was doing. And you might want to know. Here's a recent article talking about it. It's talking about the World Health Organization, which is one arm of the United Nations. WHO is just the tip of the iceberg. China is taking over the global narrative, one international body at a time. That's what China has been doing, basically assimilating various bodies of the UN, gaining influence, doing what they do, using everything. Here they wanted to take over another one of those bodies, and they got some pushback from the Trump administration. This is an article that was in Financial Times that was actually written by the assistant to the U.S. President for Trade and Manufacturing. And he's outlining what had actually happened in the UN with China. And he points out here that there are 15 specialized agencies of the UN, departments, you might say. And at the time of this writing, China already had 4 of those agencies under its control, when in the past, no country had more than 1. Not only that, but they were moving on to try and get control over another number of these. They already had control, perhaps not at the top, but in an influential level in these, in quite a few more of them. And that's what they've been doing, infiltrating the UN, getting control in the UN. It goes on to say that 3 Chinese nationals have been convicted of bribing UN officials. Those are the ones that got caught using bribery and coercion is what they do. It goes on and says, Beijing offered to cancel debts for some African nations ahead of last year's election of the Director General of the Food and Agricultural Organization. The Chinese candidate won. So they're taking some of the money that they got from the American middle class, and they're using it to bribe UN officials and even to bribe members of the UN to vote their way. This is what they're doing. So they're getting a lot of good press from the UN. Here, for instance, is one article saying 5 reasons why China is the world's sustainable development superpower. See the buzzword, sustainable development, the 2030 agenda? Well, China is a sustainable development superpower, even though China is the biggest polluter on planet Earth. Is it true love, or are they just in bed together? We have this old quote from Sun Tzu in The Art of War. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. So we have this unholy alliance that is formed between the CCP and the UN. Birds of a feather flock together, right? And then comes along this guy. Their love affair was just budding, and Donald Trump came along. And not only that, he immediately zeroed in on the CCP globalist plot. This is an article from China Focus, and it's China in 2016 year in review. And all it is Donald Trump saying, China, 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 China. He would not relent about China. We know one big thing is the so-called trade war. And for a long time, there was no war because there were no barriers. And China was just able to keep sucking all the money out of the middle class in America. And when Trump came along, he said, that's not going to happen anymore. And he started putting tariffs on those goods to reclaim some of that money and to essentially return jobs to America. Because you see, by putting tariffs on Chinese goods, he's raising the cost of those goods so that then it's just as cheap to hire people in America as it is in China. And it's a lot easier. And so that's an incentive for companies that have moved to China to come back to America again and hire workers here. Pretty smart, huh? That's what he did. Who was he thinking about with that policy? The American worker. So he was thinking about. This doesn't benefit the elite that he was doing this. They wanted things to keep going the way they were. It benefited the American worker, bringing jobs back to America. He also did this. He slapped controls on Chinese firms who were a threat to national security. It didn't make sense to him that our military was beholden to our enemies. And he decided to do something about it. You know, they use this saying that's connected with their kind of warfare, death from 1,000 cuts. In other words, just a whole host of different things is how you come against your enemy. And Donald Trump, looking at what he was doing, he was stopping the bleeding from all of those different cuts. That's what he's been working at ever since he became president. Now, as I mentioned, I don't even vote. So you can't say I'm prejudiced for Donald Trump. I'm just telling you what happened. This is what happened. Well, Donald Trump was labeled an isolationist by the uppity-uppities. And they all hated him because he was putting an end to the gravy train, at least slowing it down. They hated that. So they had nothing but criticism for his policies, and basically, from before he was in office to this day, they keep trying to paint him as some idiot who doesn't know what he's doing. And the truth is, he has been right on like a laser on what's really going on in the world. And I think this is why a lot of people are very confused about Donald Trump, because they don't really know what's going on in the world, and they just believe all this stupid propaganda. Here's an example. In Bloomberg, this is how Bloomberg is describing the trade war. And it's entitled, How Trump's Trade War Went from Method to Madness. So this is how the globalists approached Donald Trump putting the tariffs on the goods from China. He's just crazy. There's no reason for this. It's just going to hurt America. He doesn't know what he's doing. It's all over the place. It's just crazy. And it's never going to get to a conclusion. This is going to fail. That's what they kept trumpeting. However, here's where we ended up eventually. Forbes had this headline, China is losing the trade war in nearly every way. Apparently, Trump did know what he was doing. And they said China would never come to the bargaining table. However, they did. They did come to the bargaining table. And Trump forced them to accept limitations on what they're doing that put an end to much of the danger that they pose to America and the unfair trade practices. So he did win, like he won in so many different things that he's done. Now, that doesn't mean I totally approve of everything Donald Trump does, but I will tell you this, he's absolutely the best president for America that I've seen in my lifetime. My first president was Eisenhower. I've never seen a president work this hard for the country. And I have to give him credit for that, even though I don't vote. In fact, until he came, I never believed a politician could make this much of a difference. So this is really a historical thing that is something of major importance. And with all that he's done, it's not like he had the support of the political establishment or of the press. Quite the opposite. We all know what he's gone through. The deep state war, attempted soft coup against the president. He's got nothing but hate, hate, hate everywhere. From the globalists, the politicians, the establishment, the media. Constantly, they're all promoting hate against Trump. That should make you like him. Because the only reason they would do that is because he's being effective against their globalist scheme. Keep this in mind. 6 globalist megacorporations own most of the media in the United States and really in much of the rest of the world. And because they are all owned by megacorporations, they all hate Donald Trump. So what do you expect you're going to hear in the media about him? Shouldn't you expect exactly what you have heard? So here's what you always hear. I'm sure you've heard this, right? A homophobe. You know that word didn't even exist for most of my life. A liar, a racist, a bigot, a sexist, and on and on. They've labeled him everything, and of course they have heaped all kinds of lies on him, which then have been proven untrue. And with all they've done, which you would think, when you look at their reach that they have, all of the media, that they would have a huge influence. And yet, with all of that, they have been unable to unseat him. And really, it's been an amazing thing to watch, just seeing this all happen. The people want to re-elect him, but the globalists and CCP want him out. It's not just because they don't like him, but you see, he's being effective. He is actually disrupting their globalist plan. Just by what he's done with China, by reversing that situation, beginning to get a handle on that to stop the bleeding from the American worker, the American consumer, into China, that's a major disruption of their plan to bring down America. And they have to stop that. The problem they have, though, in stopping it, is that Trump's record is too good. In a whole host of areas, particularly having to do with the economy, his performance has been record-breaking in every way. Record-breaking. And not only with white people, let me say that. White people, because they constantly accuse him of being a white supremacist. And yet, no president has brought more jobs to people of color than Donald Trump. As a matter of fact, he has made a point of doing that, of raising up the people in the poorest areas. He gets on the phone and he talks with businesses and says, hey, why don't you move a factory there? Those people really need jobs there. Be a good American. And some of them do it. He does it all the time, every day. This is what he's done. How are they going to overturn a person like that when there are a lot of individual people that really owe a lot to what this man has done for their life? So they have a real problem, and they have already tried everything. They have thrown everything they've got in a conventional sense against this guy. And here he is coming up for election, and they've got nothing. What they know is that to destroy him, they have to destroy his record. If they can destroy his record, if they can wipe out his record, then they can get rid of him and get the plan back on the rails with one of their guys running the country, who can then reverse everything that Donald Trump has done. That's basically what they must do to get their plan totally back on the rails. So all of a sudden, in an election year, what happens? Zap! We have this CCP virus that seems to materialize out of nowhere. And it's right in time to wipe out all of Trump's gains just before the election. All the economy numbers were up, 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 up. We get hit with the coronavirus, and what happened to all those numbers? People are worried. People are not happy. What are you seeing in the news about Trump? Oh, what an awful guy he is. Not doing the right thing, not taking care of America, not dealing with the CCP virus. How are we going to feel if this virus goes on till June and people still aren't working? What is going to happen to the economy then? Doesn't it seem like the perfect weapon in order to turn this thing around? A counterattack of the globalists against the counterattack of the anti-globalists. That's what it is. This is the war. This is the chessboard. This is what's happening. So all of this might sound to some people like a conspiracy theory. To me, understanding what unrestricted warfare is, having documentation of who the CCP really are, the history of who they are, their war book, Unrestricted Warfare, which actually lays out this very strategy. Now it's happening in the real world. To me, that's not a conspiracy theory. It's just what's happening. What do you expect? The globalists to print in the paper that they're responsible for a virus that is spreading around the world? That's not going to happen. However, there are credible people who are warning about what's happened. Dr. Francis Boyle, creator of Bioweapons Act, says coronavirus is biological warfare weapon. Here is the man who drafted the Biological Weapons Act. He's obviously an expert on biological weapons. He says this is a bioweapon. He ought to know. He also says that the World Health Organization, an arm of the UN, already knows about it. Here's his video on YouTube. Oh, excuse me. There was his video on YouTube. Here he is, a credible expert in the field of bioweapon technology, and he's being denied a voice to tell the world about what's really happening. Should that alone not tell you, you should listen to this guy? He knows. He's telling you the truth. That's why they have to take it down. Apparently, it's against YouTube's terms to tell the truth. I think we all know this by now. Wuhan, where the virus started, has 2 laboratories linked to Chinese biowarfare programs. And this is a biowarfare lab. It's located in the very city of Wuhan where the virus happened. Yet, what they want us to believe is that that's just a coincidence. This virus, which has very unusual properties compared with everything else, just came from some animals over in this wet market thing, close, 20 minutes away from the biolab. It's just a coincidence, they say. Or is it a part of an unrestricted warfare scheme? That's what makes more sense to me. Senator Tom Cotton says it's a bioweapon. I'm thinking a senator has more information about this than you and I. After that, China came out with a propaganda piece that the U.S. created the coronavirus. I wonder why they would say that. Now, remember, the CCP has a bioweapons laboratory, which means they have certified experts at that laboratory that have looked at this virus inside out and upside down. And they're accusing America of creating the coronavirus, which means apparently they know that the virus is a man-made bioweapon. They just don't want us to think they're the ones that made it. So in a sense, even that is an admission of the CCP that it is a bioweapon. And they don't want to own that they did it. Then we have the WHO, World Health Organization. This particular article, China's shills at WHO served as propagandists for Beijing by repeating the lie that the coronavirus wasn't contagious. Little flashback on that. The virus first arose, some say as early as November, definitely in December. It was reported to the world by China, I believe, early in January. And at the time they said, don't worry, it's not contagious. And they sat on it. And they lied that it wasn't contagious. And they sat on it until after the Chinese New Year. And the Chinese New Year is the biggest migration of people in the world. 1 billion people migrate within and to and from China at Chinese New Year. So they held the news about this up until after Chinese New Year, and then all these people that went there to Wuhan went back all over the nation and all over the world. Then they told us that it was contagious and we had to do something about it. And the entire time that this was happening, they were in communication with the World Health Organization, one of the world's foremost authorities on contagious diseases. And they conferred with the contagious disease experts in China. When you think about this, it keeps getting worse. Meanwhile, here in America, what are they telling us? The globalists, they're coming out telling us, oh, it's not propaganda, and it's not their fault, it's not China's fault, and we're a bunch of racists for thinking that it's their fault even though it happened there, even though they lied to us. And even though the whole world is getting sick and many, many people are dying, and that's all supposed to be okay with us, because if it isn't, we're a bunch of racists. Here's the truth. Both the CCP and the UN experts have expert knowledge of viruses. They know what viruses do. They know how viruses spread. They know what contagion is all about. They had knowledge of this virus very early, before anybody else. That being the case, can we say the fact that they didn't react before sending carriers all over the world was a mistake? That somehow it was just some sort of political ineptitude that this happened? You could say that about people that weren't experts, but these are the experts who are in charge, and they did this. I can't see any other way you can look at it except being a calculated decision that was made for a reason. Do you understand why I'm saying that? Those people couldn't possibly have done that as a mistake, since they are leading experts of the world on viruses. It had to be on purpose that they lied to cover it up and waited until after the greatest possible exposure of the world to the virus before they revealed the truth. Is this consistent with the CCP and their past? Would they actually infect their own people in order to carry out a warfare goal? Their history is they've killed millions of their people in the past. So you can't say they wouldn't do this because it's their own people. You can't really say that here. They had a motive. Trump is costing China a huge amount of money. And he's interrupting their gravy train, and he's totally messing up the globalist plot to destroy America. Would it be worth it for them to do this, to bring him down and then to bring down all the rest of the nationalists that essentially are following behind him? You see, when you look at the whole plan from a warfare perspective, what else could it be? So New York Times, eat my shorts. The 2030 agenda. What is happening with that, with the virus? It just so happens the virus is fine-tuned to accomplish 2030 agenda goals in the world, to force people to keep those goals. It's really quite an amazing thing. You know, some folks have said the virus is a hoax, it's no different than the flu. I'm sorry, you're totally wrong about that. It's very different than the flu. As I mentioned, it's fine-tuned. It's fine-tuned to be more contagious, much more contagious than the flu or other contagious diseases. And it's targeted at certain people in the population to kill them. It largely has spared the younger people, and it's getting rid of the older people. And that's exactly what the globalists want to accomplish. They want to change the demographic, essentially, that elected Trump and is really forming the resistance in the rest of the world. You know those old people who are stupid and don't know anything? They're the ones they have to get rid of. Because unfortunately for them, they're not stupid and they do know a lot. They know what's happened in the world that the younger people don't know about and need to know about. So it can totally tip the balance in the globalists' favor if they can kill off enough of the old people. And you know from the headlines, that's the target group, one of the main target groups of this virus. And many, many older people have been killed already. Here's another thing. Because of these unusual characteristics of this bioweapon, countries must quarantine in order to defeat the virus, and they must use what today they're calling social distancing, which is really a concept from the book of Leviticus 4,000 years ago, in order to protect the public. And so what they've done by creating this virus is they have forced the nationalists to become very authoritarian and to temporarily deny freedoms from the people in the public good. So what is going to happen with those people who normally would be against the globalists? Well, if they don't understand what's going on, they're then going to get angry at the government for bringing about these restrictions and essentially turn against the people who care about them and help the globalists and the CCP. I think that's pretty diabolically amazing as a war strategy. Then again, we have, for instance, here in America and other Western countries, the economic strength of these countries is grinding to a standstill with no end in sight. A major effort of the globalists is to weaken America and its partners. And what is going to happen with the economy? I can tell you right now what's going to happen. It's happening already. Even despite loans and things from the government, a large number of the smaller businesses are going to go out of business. A lot of real estate owned by those businesses and by private individuals is going to be forfeited or bought at a very low price. Where is all that wealth going? Those businesses, that real estate, that money. It'll be the same thing that happened in 2008, right? The big globalist corporations will eat up all of that, take over more, and the banks will swallow up a great deal of it, along with the real estate. And it will make the elite more wealthy than they are, and it will drain the middle class more. That's just what they want. That's what they wanted. That's what they've been doing for years. I mentioned about the old people, but what about the fact that up until recently, all of the reports had been that the virus targets men more than women, a lot more men than women. And that's interesting because there's more men that vote conservatively than women. All coincidences. All coincidences. That's what they want us to believe. We're being told by the World Health Organization that we should stop using cash because using cash, it's a risk of infection. And we need to go with cashless means, such as credit cards. the 2030 agenda wants to totally do away with cash. They want to form a cashless society. Do you know why? Because if they control all the money, then what? Can they not then control you? Think of what the CCP is doing in the UN, in the United States, everywhere else, about controlling people using supply. You can do that with a money supply on an individual basis. They want a cashless society. People today, they like it because it's convenient. But when someone else ends up having control over your money, you might feel differently. The virus forces governments to take a strong stand on controlling movement and assembly of populations. You know, interestingly, recently I've seen that some of the mega churches are not obeying the instructions and are having big mega church meetings. And they're probably thinking, well, we're exempt from this because we're a church. And you know what? Legally, that's true. By legally, I mean according to the Constitution. It's true, but it's stupid. And it really isn't loving your neighbor to just be a pool for infection of other people. There are other ways to do it, like we're doing it right now, that keep in mind the needs of your neighbor. But you know, the point I'm trying to make here is that people who tend to be very independent tend not to keep these kind of rules, and they see it as an infringement on their freedoms. And so a lot more of them will die of the virus because of that. And whose benefit does that accrue to? The globalists, right? Don't help them by being naive. I could go on with all of these things, and I've talked about many of them in the Beasts of Daniel seminar. You can look up these goals at the UN and read the entire thing, and read between the lines, and you'll understand what's happening and the different ways in which they're establishing control. And once you understand that, and you look at what we're learning about this virus, you'll see that the virus totally supports these goals and is in fact changing the world to move us all closer to those goals. That is what is happening. And basically, one effect of this is to undermine nationalist governments, to make people think, no, we need a global control over things because my government wasn't able to protect me from the virus. And if you believe that, then what's going to happen is that you will, probably unknown to yourself, be helping the globalists with their propaganda and not helping yourself. Dealing with the CCP virus and dealing with the globalists are two different things. A lot of people have confused these two things. There are people who know that this virus is really from the globalists and from communist China. And because they feel that way, they will not cooperate with any kind of effort to defeat the virus, thinking that by doing that, they're cooperating with the globalists. That's too simplistic. That thinking is too simplistic. You have to deal with two different things. You have to deal with the virus as a health issue, because that's what it is. It's a health issue. And so, since it is a health issue, you must deal with it as a health issue. You serve yourself and your neighbor by cooperating with the government in any measures that are protecting the public health on a temporary basis. When all of this is over, no, we shouldn't accept tyranny, but that's a different thing. We must deal with this as a health issue. And then we need to deal with the globalists by rejecting them and rejecting their political correctness, rejecting all of their propaganda. Don't let them control our minds, and instead allow the scriptures to control our minds. That's where the truth is found. You know, what I'd say about this is, compare this to actual live fire warfare. Suppose your enemy is shooting bullets in your direction, and you're in the foxhole, and you see the bullets coming your way, and you say, well, I'm not going to cooperate with my enemy in this war, and those aren't real bullets. So I'm just going to get up out of this foxhole and not accept what the enemy is doing. What happens to you? You're going to be perforated. See, that's how you have to see this virus. These are the bullets coming at you. Get in the foxhole and live long enough to fight the battle. And allow your grandparents to live long enough to help you. So you might be wondering, if something this severe is happening now in this covert global war, what can I expect after this? One thing you can expect is that the life you knew before is never coming back. Things are changed. Remember, if you happened to be there back then when this happened, when 9/11 happened. After 9/11, everything changed. You remember that? Did it ever change back again? Remember the Patriot Act? Before the Patriot Act, you could go into a bank, open a bank account. They didn't even need your Social Security number. You could have privacy in your banking and a whole lot of other things. How long has that been since that happened? Since before 9/11. So many other things have continued, and they're never going back from 9/11. 2008, when the global financial crisis came. Did they ever go back? Did things ever go back? Did the economy ever go back? The middle class was hard hit by 2008, shrank dramatically as a result of 2008. And the people that lost their homes, lost their retirement, lost so much, nobody gave it back to them. That was gone forever. Now we've got this, the CCP virus. It's totally changing the world. Don't expect that things are going to go back. They're not. They might get more like they were than they are now for a little while, but it's not going back. And the truth is, we don't know exactly how this is going to change the world, but we do know it's going to bring us closer to the global government, because that's what it's designed to do. It's just one of a series of shocks that are planned for this war over about the next decade. So the thing is, some people are saying this is just some sort of an anomaly, and then when it's over, everything's going to be fine again. That's not what's going to happen. There are going to be a series of shocks, not all bioweapons. Remember, unrestricted warfare could be anything, right? But whatever it is, it's going to be more diabolical than you or I could think about right now because of the people it's coming from. And it's going to be more effective than this. It's going to, these shocks are going to increase in intensity, if anything. It's going to be a difficult time to live over the next 10 years or so. And then after that, it's going to get worse. This is not what you want to hear. But it is what you need to hear. Because if you understand this is the world you live in now, you can take steps to deal with it, to realize, you know, the normal things that people do, just go on with life and just enjoying themselves and doing the things they want. You're not going to be ready if that's the kind of life you lead. You're not going to be ready as these shocks come in upon you. Finally, they will accomplish their goal. I wish I didn't have to tell you that, but unfortunately, the scriptures say that this must happen, not that it can happen. There's nothing in the scriptures to indicate that anybody can change this. It is going to happen. And the globalists will win, and there will be a one-world government. And when that happens, everybody's going to be cheering. They're going to think it's the greatest thing that ever happened until it isn't. And then enslavement is going to fall upon mankind, and it's going to be the worst period of history ever. That's what's going to happen. There's only one place that you can get the help you need in order to deal with what's coming down the pike. And it's not any place on earth. Your Father in heaven knows all about this, prophesied about it in the scriptures, and is there to stand by those who will turn to him. And that's my best advice for everybody. That's the thing to do. Turn to him. And there's so much more I would like to tell you about this. And you need to understand these scriptures. That's why we did the Beast of Daniel seminar, and this information stands alone. You will not find this anywhere else in its entirety, and it's still the very best information you can find on this topic of the one world government as prophesied in the Bible. And this is being offered to you. The information that is in this 8 DVD set for a low price of $0. $0. Just your time, that if you care enough about what's going on, you'll come to tsiyon.net and take the time to take in this information so you can be ready. And I just want to urge everybody that can hear this, especially those people who are encountering this information for the first time, please come and do it. No obligation at all. Just come and do it. We don't need your credit card. You don't have to prove who you are. Just come and do it. Here's a news report that I happened to come across today, just as I was finishing up these slides that I've been sharing with you. And I found this to be so encouraging. This is from the Pew Research Center. Apparently they did a polling just recently. This is from March 30th, so just yesterday. And as you can see, the headline reads, "Most Americans say coronavirus outbreak has impacted their lives." Well, that's not the part that encouraged me. What I like is what it says in the smaller letters. More than half have prayed for an end to the virus's spread. More than half of Americans have been urged by this virus to get connected up with their Creator. Isn't that encouraging? That's what I would say to do about the virus. Use this as an opportunity to get connected up with your Creator. Spend some time in prayer. Ask Him if these things I've been telling you are true. Ask Him to show you what the truth is. Ask Him to show you what He wants you to do with your life in these critical times. He has the answers. Go to Him and ask. Coming up soon, we don't have the exact date yet, we will have another message regarding this topic of the CCP virus. And that message will explain the details of the creation of the bioweapon and its deployment. Really, a lot of details are available, and I'd like to share what I have researched and found with you. That's the Weaponized CCP Virus Promotes UN Agenda 2030. I'd like to pray with you now. Our Father in heaven, we come before your throne, knowing, Father, that you have known the end from the beginning, and that you have known that this had to happen, that most of the people would rebel against you and have done that, and that there would be those who would rise up in positions of dominance in the world, and that at the end of days we would have the situation enabled by high technology and super communication abilities where the elite of the world could make this last final push to enslave all of mankind. Now we're seeing the war going on between those who are basically the soldiers for the globalists and those who are resisting against that push. And because of that, what we've seen over the last couple of decades has been really amazing apocalyptic events, which are really moves in this universal war. And now we are being affected by this latest attack by a bioweapon disguised as just one of those things that happens. Father, thank you for opening our eyes to the war that's really happening. Help us, Father, not to be afraid, not to be in confusion, to have your peace in our hearts, the peace that comes to those who know the truth. Father, I want to pray for the honest-hearted people that I was reading about tonight who have been reaching out to you in prayer because of this virus, wherever they may be. I pray, Father, for them, for the righteous, that you might reach back to them, that you might answer their prayers in your own wonderful supernatural way, that you will draw them closer, and that you will show them the direction that they need to go in order to make their way through these monumental events of these last few years that are left before the end of this world system we live in. Father, we thank you that you offer an amazing and wonderful hope at the end of all of this, the hope of your kingdom ruling over the earth. This is what, Father, we long for. I pray for your people, Father. I know that your word says he will be saved who endures to the end. Help us, Father, to endure to the end. In Yeshua's name, amen. Thank you all for being with us. And now I'm going to turn the meeting back to my daughter, Abigail.
We want to thank you all for joining us tonight, and we want to invite you all to join us again next week at the same time for our Passover live stream. Shabbat Shalom, and we'll see you then.